Welcome to In the Demo, a show about the stories that get told about groups, how those stories got made, what we think those stories get wrong, and why it matters. You hosts? Farrah Bostic is the founder and head of research and strategy of The Difference Engine, a strategic insights consultancy focused on helping business leaders make decisions. Adam Piano, author and brand consultant and managing director of brand strategy at Arizona State University. You are now in the demo.
I'm Adam Piano.
Do you want to say what generation you are? Are you now like not sure anymore?
I'm not
sure.
I feel like I always was like, oh no, I'm definitely Gen X, but lately I as I look at the dates more and more, I get confused. Maybe I'm not. I know there's an entire first season where I said it very assertively that I was Generation X.
Yes.
Sometimes I'm not, depending on who's presenting the research.
Right. Well, now you know how I feel, which is like, and so after a certain point,
you're legitimately in the cusp.
I am. Yes.
Yeah.
Although lately I have been engaging with certain people who want to start the cusp at 1977. And here's what I'm just going to say about that. I was born 10 days before 1977. So I'm going to go ahead and just call it 77.
Yeah. I know, but
I'm not splitting this hair any further with anybody.
But that's the arbitrary nature of the entire endeavor. And that what our conversation going back to Kim Parker at Pew was like, okay, so you're 10 days outside of this new range that we've decided on. Now you have these other set of characteristics? I'm pretty sure not.
Well, this is, I think, the other... I feel like there are kind of multiple through lines in talking about what the generations are, which is it all feels extremely arbitrary. Like, in the same way that... So at some point, I'll find this link and maybe put it in the show notes or something. There was a great little piece that I came across 2 days ago that was like someone decided to compare the Big Five personality test, the Myers-Briggs, and astrology, and see how they did against life outcomes. Now, I'm particularly fascinated by the astrology method.
I like it as a control because it is just totally random. That's just like, and then let's just see what happens if we just make it up.
Yes. So the Big Five personality test has at least some validation to it. It appears to be more highly correlated with life outcomes than Myers-Briggs, which is more highly correlated is the word I'm looking for, than astrology. But apparently like MBTI is basically sitting like halfway between astrology and the Big Five. I have saved this for me to do some more diving into because it's just too funny to me. But it's the same thing. Like I'm born December 21st. My brother's born December 23rd. Now you can all go open credit cards. But like the idea that because I was born 2 days and 4 hours and 4 years earlier than him means like he's a Capricorn and I'm a Sagittarius. And there's like some fundamentally different thing about our personalities that could not be explained by birth order, gender, our family's like household income at time of birth. Like there's a like which we were born in different hospitals. Like
mostly year and zip code. You know?
Yeah. Like most, you're absolutely right. Like if I want someone to rerun that thing and just do, it's birth year plus zip code.
Oh yeah. And zip code by
then
decimal,
it's Big Five.
Yeah, exactly.
Then it's MBTI. Then it's.
That's
right. But yes, I think like as we think about these generational definitions, I think we can start to talk about the hot new generation that's coming down the line, which is maybe that's the title of the episode is Hot New Generation Just Dropped.
No, wake up, babe. New generation dropped.
That's it. That's what it is. Wake up, babe. New generation dropped.
Full disclosure to our wonderful listeners. We started recording this episode last session, but we ended up just going down a rabbit hole of some other topic, so we're going to do something special
sort of
with that
fashiony.
one. Yeah. I mean, we just we were riffing, we were going. But
let us cook.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes we were absolutely cooking. It was 40 minutes in when Farrah said, "So anyway, let's talk about Generation Alpha." Like, I don't think anyone's going to tolerate this.
That ship has sailed.
Yeah, let's do it as its own episode. And also let's give it the heft and the weight it deserves, because it is absolutely a real thing and not invented claptrap to sell stuff at all.
No, God, no, totally real.
So, should
100%.
You read a book, or you are reading a book?
I read a chapter of a book. I do think it's a good idea to start there, because one of the places we do like to start with these stories is, where do these narratives begin? Like who gets to name the generation, and who's the first one to really kind of write about them in any meaningful way. So a book published by McCrindle Research, and is it Mark or Mike McCrindle, the founder of it? In any event, they published a book in 2009. First published in 2009. They've updated it a couple of times since. There's a 2014 update, more or less self-published by them with University of New South Wales. They are an Australian market research firm, and they wrote a book called The ABC of XYZ.
It is Mark McCrindle.
Mark McCrindle, thank you. And they start with a perspective that Gen Alpha is born between the years 2010 and 2024. So I just want to kind of pause here and say...
May I say, though, I'm really
They hadn't
pleased.
been born yet.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so notwithstanding, I'm glad to see them, though, they're asserting clear boundaries of, like, this is the time, which we know from the conversation we were just having, the years for Gen X and millennials has wavered a little bit. Only boomers have been set by the U.S. Census. So to have some guardrails on the age and have someone trying to define that, I'm okay with that. I have questions, I think, but...
Yeah, and I think part of what's interesting about all of this is that, their definition of, now it's Australia, so we have to say bloody Gen Z, is that their birth years are 95 to 2009. So what's interesting here is that, just as like a quick kind of meta observation, when we go back to generations by Howe and Strauss, like that is, their theory is that generations tend to be about 20 to 22 years in length. That is not true of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. They are each about 14 years long. Yeah. And so that is interesting. Now, if you go back to like the origins of generational theory, a lot of it has to do with sort of being born between cultural bookends. And so like, I think there is this kind of question about, well, what's the meaningful cultural bookend that happens in 1995 or 6? That starts a new generation. Right. Like I am unpersuaded that that's the reasonable start date. The original definition, as we've talked about before, of millennials was roughly 80 to 2000, and but now we've like backed up millennials in some studies, moved them forward to, back them up to 77, moved them up to 82. But we've now kind of hard stopped them at 95, 96 to make way for Gen Z. And then we've decided that Gen Z ends at about 2009. I have to say, like that, the end point makes slightly more sense to me of some of these generations than the start point does.
You've asserted on another conversation that the iPhone and kind of mobile computing as a cultural breakpoint, and so that was 2007 technically, but wide adoption, that 2009, the Great Recession, like I can see a bunch of things that happened that we've discussed before as either an end point or a beginning point.
And the iPad launches in 2010, which seems to be very important to the cultural identity of Gen Alpha.
They're digital natives. I don't know if you do.
They are. They are also, by the way, voice natives. They're voice natives, Adam.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
and they're all wearing Google glasses.
Yes. When was this book written?
2009.
So it was predicting like they will all be conversing with Siri and Alexa nonstop. And it's like,
yes.
I don't know. I don't know, buddy, if that's really true.
Well, I think interestingly, like at that point in time, the voice command stuff wasn't even the big deal. It was just this like everything would be mediated by a handheld screen of some type or another.
Right.
And but like the same kind of was said about Gen Z. Like the question is always like, does it matter when they kind of come of age to a technology, or does it matter when they're born? And in the case of Gen Alpha, we've decided to say that it matters when they're born, that like they would have never known a time, literally have never known a time without a tablet in the household.
Mm-hmm.
And a smartphone. But I think the other reason that 2009 does actually make a certain amount of sense to me is if you're born in 2009, 2010, you are not probably going to have early childhood memories of the financial crisis and the Great Recession.
Yeah.
You will have been born into the recovery and then probably into a period of like, lackluster growth,
I guess my question though is, so he laid out those years in 2009 of 2010 to roughly 2024. And that's still, so I'm reading an article from Business Insider, the paragon of journalism.
Yes.
And it is also, so this is what happened with millennials rising. Like that assertion he made stuck, and now they're reporting it as 2024 as the end date. But to the point we're just working through, what's the cultural touch point that is based on? They're just sort of saying, it's going to end about here. Now, you could say COVID and say 2024 is the end of COVID, theoretically, hopefully. Mm-hmm. But shouldn't we, like, it shouldn't be forecasted as much as it should be contemporaneous.
Retroactively.
Yeah,
it probably ought to be retroactively defined, which it more or less was for like boomers and Gen X, right? Like the Gen X is in their 20s before they get a generational handle. But I think that's right. I think the other thing that's interesting is it feels like, well, because we made Gen Z only 14 years, then I guess we'll make. And actually, like, if you start millennial at 82 and ended at 96, then it's also a 14-year cycle. Mm-hmm. Again, I have no idea why you would pick the middle of Reagan's first term and the end of Clinton's first term and say, yep, that's a window. Like,
right. I don't know what the text is.
I get no idea what the kind of context for that would necessarily be. And to Kim Parker's point, there just are not these kind of obvious upticks, downticks in birth rates that are as dramatic as they were with the beginning and end points of the baby boom.
Mm-hmm. And then so that was the reason for the millennial, the interest in the millennials was that originally called the echo boom. So they said, okay, we're going to have this rush of the birth rate should jump. And okay, I get that. But so now this is the echo of the echo. But it still seems a little bit like feeling our way around it more than data or science.
Well, and then to your point about kind of prospectively in 2009 saying that the end date of Gen Alpha will be 2024 is like, well, that must simply be based on the fact that the two prior generations are 14 years. And so now we've just shortened the generational cycle from about 21 years to about 14. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't really explain to you why that would be, except that I think one of the problems of, if you go back to baby boomers, born between like 1945, 1946 and like 1963, 1964, that is a long stretch.
A lot changed in culture.
A lot changed in that period of time. Yeah. And so someone born between like, I don't know, 45 and 55 probably has more in common than people born between 55 and 65. But even like within that, there are undoubtedly micro generations of cultural context because there was just so much change happening. The interesting thing about picking a number out of the air and saying it's 2024 is it does feel a bit like, in some of the things that came out even in 2023 about Gen Alpha, like the Morning Consult piece. Yeah. That is interesting because it's very dedicated to the idea of like, we're in the middle of a Great Recession, but we weren't. And we are not. And so far, it doesn't look like there's going to be one anytime soon. Like inevitably there will be one, but we actually came out, the United States economy at least came out of COVID stronger than any other Western economy. And we have, consistently low unemployment. We have wage growth. Even housing prices are starting to come down. Whatever. Inflation is starting to steady out a little bit. Like all of those things are just measurably true. People still say, half of all voters still say that the economy is in terrible shape. But I think, we've talked about that before. The vibes are bad. But 2024 does feel like an interesting year, and it will be interesting to see how the remainder of this year plays out, because it could wind up being a very useful bookend. It could wind up being like, sure, it's the year we more or less said we were done with COVID. The CDC has, against the WHO's advice, loosened recommendations about,
who knows what political
about the spread of
unrest
prevention.
Yeah.
Yes. But, this is the year where some record number of people are going to be voting in elections worldwide. It's going to be something like 5 billion people are going to vote this year. So there's the U.S. elections. It is looking like the UK is going to hold their elections. Russia technically is having an election. Like there are elections happening all over the world, and who the heck knows? Like there are definitely some people that are like, well, this could also be the year that democracy dies. Yeah. But so that's just sort of an interesting sort of backdrop there. The other reason, when you start to dig into this, that I found it useful to go look at this book, is that much like, first of all, he absolutely references Howe and Strauss's generational theory, because you must if you work in market research. And I really want, if books could kill, to either do The Fourth Turning or do the original Generations book. Because I feel like I know a lot of brand planners, brand strategists at ad agencies who just have like injected that into their bloodstream and take it as a given.
It is definitely a personality for many planners that are just like, this is my viewpoint on everything now. Not sure.
Yes. It's also like there's a personality among planners to be like anti how brands grow. And they want to make it a thing that there's some group of people out there who are like, their whole personality is being pro how brands grow.
Right.
Whatever. Like, I don't even think Byron Sharp's whole personality is how brands grow, and he wrote the book. But nevertheless, he makes a reference to them. That's just required. But one of the other things that they did, which we have seen repeated with these generations since millennials, is doing a survey where you ask respondents what you think the generation after Gen Z, bloody Gen Z, might be called. And so something like, what did you say? 25% of their respondents suggested Generation A. And then they asked some, why did you select this type of question, apparently, in the survey. And the respondents who suggested Generation A said the labels also signified what we can expect of this generation and their times, a new and positive beginning for all, with global warming and terrorism controlled. Respondents who suggested the following labels made similar comments: the regeneration, Generation Hope, Generation New Age, the Saviors, Generation Y, the letter Y, not, and the New Generation.
I like the Saviors. I feel like no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. And also like, wow, we're just going to keep going with that. The young people are going to save us. They're going to save us.
Yeah, you could copy that.
They're not born yet, but they're going to save us.
You can copy that section out of the book and you can paste it into the next book for Generation Beta.
Every last one of them. Apparently, there was also this suggestion of the neoconservatives, because they would have grown up aware of their impact on the environment and the economy. And I just want to say that one's also taken and has a whole other set of definitions.
Yeah.
So I think we're not going to take that one. Now, the other thing that is really happening, because again, they're writing from a point in time where in the first version of this book, assuming this chapter was in the first version of the book, these kids weren't born yet. In the revision in 2011 and then the expansion in 2014, they're 4 or 5 years old, 2 to 5 years old. The interesting thing is he in this chapter on or they, whatever, him, the McCrindle group, write this chapter about Gen Alpha. a lot of it is vamping. They don't have a lot to say about them. There aren't any of them yet.
Right.
And so
it's the same
right,
thing as millennials rising. They're judging the potential parents to assert what the generation's going to be. And it's like, we don't like millennials now, so we're not going to. So this generation is an export of that feeling.
Right. So they feel like they have to do this setup thing.
I love this.
Which is that they do a section called The Demography of the Future, where he talks about reading, his favorite futurist books. And of course, he's got the requirements, which are Future Shock by Alvin Toffler from 1970, Megatrend by Naisbitt in 1982, a book that lived on the back of the toilet in the powder room of my house for I don't know how long. Don't know what that says about that book. But his favorite apparently is a book called How to Survive the 80s. And some of the predictions made in these various books are things like, by the late 80s, all offices would be paperless. By the late 90s, we'd all be working from home. By the 2000s, we'd be working 3.5 days a week. And so what he says is, and I'm going to quote him here, the takeaway from this for me, apart from watching my own forward forecasts, is that technology has a time horizon of months, the economy of perhaps a year or so, but only demography can give a clear forecast decades into the future. And the next thing he does is say, but you got to be careful. And the examples in this book are truly something. Like, this feels like you guys put this together over like a week-long office retreat or something.
A webinar.
It's wild. So he says, take my number crunching on Elvis impersonators. A quick Google search tells me that by the end of the year in which Elvis Presley died, 1977, there were an estimated 54 professional Elvis impersonators. Where? Like, just in the US or just in Vegas? Like...
How do you track that?
How do you know? There's only 54 of them?
Yeah. Okay.
By the late 1980s, this had jumped to over 5,000! Exclamation point. Based on this growth rate, it can be quickly calculated. By late in the year 2018, more than 80% of the people on the planet will be professional Elvis impersonators. Clearly, for accurate trend forecasts, a multifactorial approach is key. By triangulating on the future, we can most accurately predict it. I just want to tell you something. I literally was talking to Dave Mastronardi from Game Storming Group the other day, and we were talking about how, like, real futurists don't make predictions about the future. That's not what futurists do.
And
they engage in an imaginative process. And it's not a straight math problem. It is neither just like a quick extrapolation. This rate of growth, 80%. I myself am a professional Elvis impersonator. I only do podcasting on the side. And like, but even then, like, thank you. But even like the multifactorial approach is key, is like, okay, but now we have to start thinking about what factors you're going to use. One of the things that we always start from in these generational discussions is not merely whether Elvis is still alive. Which, I don't know. Did you watch the Animaniacs in high school or college? There was that thing where they did the they spun a wheel at the end of the episode, the wheel of something, turn, tell us a lesson we should learn. And so they would spin, and then they'd get the little card off of it. And at one time it said, Elvis lives on in our hearts, his music, and a trailer park outside Milwaukee. It's just a very 90s joke, you guys. But so,
I don't think younger people do not know that there was roughly 30 years of urban legend that Elvis faked his own death and was alive. I don't think that's in the culture anymore. Until
wild.
You just said it, it didn't even occur to me to think about that until you just said that trailer park thing.
No.
And I was like, oh, right, we used to have all those tabloids.
Yeah, JFK Jr. is the new...
Yeah.
JFK Jr. is the new
Where
Elvis.
we go one, we go all, Farrah. Yeah.
Oh God,
exactly.
Let's edit that out.
Yeah.
So the other thing that we have to do, aside from this throat clearing about how everything I'm about to tell you is mostly bullshit.
Right.
I have no actual data. But what data do I have? What forecasts do I have access to? And here we get into the inevitable, like, aging of the population and population sizes, chiefly by age. And so, the next generation will be the children of Gen Y. Mostly true.
But that's
just
logic.
by like people's active reproductive years.
Right.
Their grandparents will largely be the younger boomers, maybe, depends on a lot of factors. By the time the oldest of this generation are 10, around 2020, there'll be more 65-year-olds than 1-year-olds. And as many people age 60 to 70 as there will be age 10 to 20. Now, I'm pretty sure these are Australia numbers, by the way,
Okay.
but they're probably roughly right for most of English-speaking countries. In light of these this is my favorite part because it recalls our favorite icon of millennials rising. In light of these figures, the next generation, very much like their older siblings, the Zeds, will be a precious generation, prized and protected by their parents as the population pyramid becomes increasingly rectangular.
Yes. You're referring, of course, our totem of the baby on board.
Yes. Perhaps this is why we've seen a comeback, Adam, of the baby on board sign, is these prized, precious, protected, it alliterates, of Gen Alpha. The other thing we talk about with them is, as we have with millennials as well, is coming of age in a time of unprecedented aging, as they put it, rising costs, emerging global challenges, and the biggest intergenerational transfer of wealth and leadership succession ever seen. This one I actually think is worth us spending some time on it, maybe in a separate episode. And that's that the narrative about millennials is that they've been like shut out of wealth because the boomers are parking in their houses and not selling their houses. There are a variety of structural reasons why boomers are not selling their houses. It's not just to keep you poor, millennials. It is to avoid being poor themselves.
They are allowed to live in the house.
They're allowed to live in their house. Right now would be a pretty bad time to sell your home and try to buy another home and not find yourself with, a much higher mortgage rate than you previously had. But in any event, the intergenerational transfer of wealth and leadership succession is about boomers finally kind of completing the process of retirement. The oldest of the Gen Xers beginning the process of retirement, and the bulk of the workforce being millennials and Gen Z. And so that will be this like leadership succession thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that will happen is people, as you may know, die.
Wait,
and
sure?
when they do, they tend to, if they have any, leave their property to their children's generation or to the subsequent generation. And that is the intergenerational transfer of wealth that they're talking about in this book, is that the boomers are going to die and all their big houses are going to go to the next generation down. The other thing that he talks about feels very, very Neil and Bill to me, which is he starts talking about the need to, rebuild infrastructure and, carbon issues related to environmental sustainability and peak aging and pension and health and social service liabilities. All of that kind of social safety net cost of running a country stuff looms large here. And so he also says, and this has got to be very, very Australian. So from more public-private partnerships to a society increasingly used to paying for once public provisions, from public roads to toll roads, public health to private hospitals, and public education to non-government schools, the world of Gen Alpha will be a privately funded one. This is like some kind of neoliberal meets neoconservative wet dream of like, we will have finally
achieved zero government. Yeah.
We will be in an era of zero government. Now, at the same time, we've got to talk about loneliness and depression. I mean, it is a hilarious total lack of transition. Literally the end of the sentence previously is, the world of Gen Alpha will be a privately funded one, period. Next paragraph. Loneliness and depression will become increasingly significant problems for society as solo person households dominate 1/3 of all households in 2020. And of course, this also brings down the average household population. So we are always low-key concerned about single mothers. We are always low-key concerned about marriage rates. We are always low-key concerned about people not having more than 3 children. I think one of the things I've really figured out with the population stuff is, having a couple of kids is not enough. Like they really want you to have 3+. But anyway, like if what you have is a single parent raising a child, maybe 2, then you get these household populations down to 2.3 persons compared to 3.3. It's my sincere hope that the 0.3 is not how they're measuring the dog, because the dog is a whole person.
Yeah, at least one. Sometimes 1.2, depending on the dog, how good it is. Some other fun bits. So I did not read this book. I found it, but I didn't dive into it. So what's interesting is I am reading, I've read maybe a dozen articles, and I would guess that 66%, I think 8 out of the dozen, reference Mark McCrindle and his research. So he may be the patient zero for what I'm seeing now. So now it's 2023. This article from Business Insider that I have up on my screen now references him, references his book, references that he coined the phrase Gen Alpha. And then it makes some assertions that, as I read it, I go, oh, I wonder if they picked it up directly from the 2009 book, or if this is based on some new reporting or data. Because let me tell you what caught my attention. As you know, I work in higher ed, and there's a bunch of subheads in these articles that say this will be the most educated generation ever. Gen Alphas may continue their millennial parents' pursuit of higher education if their parents have any say. Among parents with kids under 18, Gen Alpha's parents want their kids to head to college more, etc. But we're seeing in reality declining interest in higher education, a growing distrust of institutions. In the US, we're seeing some politicians put pressure on the institutions of higher learning. We're seeing men specifically in the US enroll at much lower rates than they had in the past. And we're seeing a trend that really does not work with the trend that they're reporting here and saying, oh, this is going to be the generation that really chases education. Like, I'm not sure about that's not how the numbers are playing out. And yet this article from 2024 is still saying it as if it's happening. So
this is so evergreen. Sorry, my AirPod suddenly just decided not to participate any longer. It is really consistent, these stories. I mean, we saw it with millennials. We're clearly continuing to see it with Gen Alpha. I'm sure we saw it with Gen Z, but like that assumption that they'll just get more and more educated.
Yes.
And we've actually kind of seen this just sort of flatlining of higher ed
for a long time.
For a long time. Yeah. I think they are absolutely kind of building from here. I think someone kind of always has to go first. It seems to be the way of the world. And you know, there are other things that, is it Neil Howe or Neil Strauss?
Yeah, Bill Strauss and Neil Howe.
Bill Strauss and Neil Howe. So Neil Howe is like still talking about this stuff, but from kind of a bigger perspective now. I think is more interested in the kind of economy and politics side of things than just talking about generations. So like, you know, didn't write about Gen Alpha. But yeah, so someone always has to go first. It's interesting to me that so many of these so many of the components of generational myths are coming from Australia. You know, like the avocado toast stuff. And, you know, there are a lot of great market research companies in Australia, and they are themselves going through, you know, a kind of similar type of generational or demographic change, let's put it that way, as everybody else. I think it's just that there is also like the politics in Australia are very particular. And
of any locale. It's
yeah,
true.
yeah. And so it's kind of
expand those beyond the national borders.
Right. And so there are things in here like that stuff about public-private partnerships and, you know, basically the hollowing out of government-funded infrastructure that, I mean, don't get me wrong, that is a core pillar of you know, conservatism in the US and the UK and in Canada as well. But like, it is playing out in a particular kind of way in Australia at a particular kind of pace.
What it means in Australia is different than what it means in the UK and different than what it means it's not the exact same flavor.
Yeah. And I think when you start looking at, things like, I think what is helpful with, to some degree, I think maybe it is the fact that these are all kind of Anglo countries, that they have enough in common kind of culturally and governmentally and in terms of like the role of the media and so on, that you have similar kinds of trends and concerns. So, the issue about basically, when we're talking about this public-private partnership thing, we're talking about tax bases. When we're talking about loneliness and depression, we're really just talking about like, are we comfortable with small families? Are we comfortable with single parents? I was listening to something recently where they were basically saying there's, not really a lot of evidence that the U.S. is in a crisis of social isolation of loneliness, but we are in a crisis of social cohesion. Like, we don't feel lonely, but we don't feel like we can trust everybody else.
Right.
Like those are kind of separated things. But when a lot of what they're talking about in this chapter on meeting Gen Alpha is actually baby boomers and like how many of them there are going to be and what stage of their life they're going to be in, that by 2030 in Australia, the largest age group will be 60 plus, that like 20% of Australians will be over age 60, that like that's going to have very significant impacts on the workforce, on household incomes, and on spending. And so that will have an impact on tax bases and the economy and everything else. And so this is always sort of the concern that underpins all generational analysis. They're not trying to tell you about like how to market to them as young people just because they're interesting young people, but because there is this deep-seated anxiety about where will, who's going to fuel the economy, who's going to pay the taxes. That's basically it.
Yeah.
And, and they talk about things like,
who's going to buy all this shit is what the question is repeatedly.
Exactly. And so they have concerns about job tenure being at an all-time low, that they say like currently it's like 4 years is the average job tenure in Australia. It will be 3 years soon enough and less than that. So Generation Alpha will be the most job fickle generation, having an average of 6 careers in their lifetime. Now, that's funny because
in 2 of the articles.
Yeah. So what's funny about that is the book Megatrends literally predicted that baby boomers would have 4 careers in their lifetime, and that this was going to be just like so radically different from any of their predecessors. Now, I want to pause here and just say that my grandfather worked at an airplane manufacturing plant. He was a carpenter, plumber, handyman kind of guy. Then he became a teacher and a school district superintendent. And he served in the Army Air Corps. So 4 careers. And then retired before he was 60.
Right.
So like, I don't know, like these stories all feel a little overblown to me. But that is also this kind of like, they are not going to have the kind of stability we imagine previous generations had. And stability is measured by things like 2-parent households, more than 1 child, sticking to one job for multiple years, not changing careers radically too many times. And on the other hand, there is also just this, like the tension exists between that makes us feel like things are really unstable. But on the other hand, there's so much room, frankly, for a kind of exploitation and arbitrage of these people who will never have like full-time salary jobs with benefits and pensions, right? Like they will be cheaper than previous generations.
But also they will contribute less to the tax base, almost necessarily, because they won't develop a tenure that allows them to like pay into those things.
This is the real trouble that all capitalists find themselves in.
But also all generational reporting like this, especially forward-looking. We're not making predictions. He was clear on that, but the book is a prediction, series of predictions.
Except about Elvis impersonators.
It
and
just
then he
always
feels
says
really strongly.
Well, we all do. That's a hot topic. Third rail. Let's not go there. The tension of every single one of these things is this is the most brightest, shiniest generation yet. They're the most diverse. They're digital natives. They're going to fix it. We hate them. They're not going to contribute in the same way. They are self-centered. They are consumers in this particular way. You get the same copy paste. We should do a quiz where we pull quotes from descriptions of each of the generations, starting with boomers that are, contemporary from their identification, and see if you could even tell. You can't. I know you can't already.
It's true. I think if you just took out the names of the generations, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. This, to the point about things like higher education, this book also says that they're expecting Generation Alpha to be the most educated. That 90% in Australia will finish high school, essentially, and as more, which is up like 10%. And the majority will go on to tertiary education in some form. Now, it's different in more Commonwealth countries, let's put it that. The education system is different. But nevertheless, one of the things that means then, like, we're great, more educated. On the other hand, quote, as education inflation continues, the adult milestones will be pushed back even further. Once Generation Alpha leave high school, their parents can expect to wait in excess of 13 years before and if they become grandparents. Almost 1 in 3 Alpha women will never have children. Now, again, I just want to say, they're not born yet at the time of this writing. But the subsequent paragraphs are about population growth outstripping the West in China and India. Literally, the next paragraph is about how fast China and India are going to grow and that India is going to surpass China. The paragraph after that is about pensions and whether we're going to have to keep pushing back the retirement age. I just want people who make TikToks about how they are so Gen Z or they are so Gen Alpha or whatever to know that these terms are not about you. These terms are about your grandparents and about whether or not they're going to get to meet their grandkids before they kick it and whether or not they're going to have a pension.
Yeah.
With nice, reasonable cost of living increases year on year. That's what this is about. It's always about this. It's never about anything else. It's not really about how tech savvy you are, how highly educated you are, or any of that stuff. It is all about whether you will be able to hold up the expense of the society you live in your working years. Yeah,
which is why the SHRM influence in the millennial conversation was so important. They introduced it in the Gen X write-ups about how different Gen X was at work. And then in millennials, at least 30% of the coverage and content was about how do you manage these people for productivity? You see the same stories there. It's already included in these cases. They lump Gen Z and Gen Alpha together because you can't manage someone who's not born yet. But you still see the same predictions.
You say that.
Of they're going to have more careers. They're going to be more fickle. They're going to want more benefits. And it's and we don't want to pay anything extra. We just want somehow to all magically retire and have funded roads without having to invest anything.
Right.
Or pay any taxes if we can avoid it.
Oh, please, let's avoid it. That would be terrible to pay taxes.
The worst.
Nobody wants to do that.
I don't enjoy paying them, but I do enjoy having schools with electricity.
Yes. I also am in favor of that. I like having,
it's not bad.
Having schools and libraries, having a functioning fire department. Those things are good. I'm generally in favor of those things.
But I have some good news.
That's my hot take.
Yeah, that is extremely coming in hot. Some good news that I have is that what sets Generation Alpha apart is they're the only generation that interacts with a global marketplace. Every quote, every product of every country is available to them within a few clicks in their pocket, McCrindle said. I, as a Gen Xer, I think, cannot access those products and I have not experienced the change from being able to actually go to a store and find a product versus being forced to order globally through Amazon only Gen Alpha is influenced by that, as you know.
Yeah.
And it shapes
that's
everything
right.
about how they're going to see the world.
It's true. I think like this really is a thing that it's really undercovered how much, the digital natives, the mobile natives, the voice natives have left the rest of us behind. We are still, I mean, I've got a teletype machine downstairs.
I write on slates. Mostly because I like the sound.
I have those like old mechanical calculators because I also like the sound. They sound great, but they have to have the tape, the roll of paper tape in them. Otherwise,
I do actually like that.
Otherwise, I can't really keep track of the numbers in my head. I have to see them printed in little blue ink.
Just like all your emails, right?
Yep. Oh, I print out all my emails.
What if the email says,
I have someone else print it out for me.
Environment. Yeah. Oh, even better. Even better. Yeah. You have your gal do it?
I have my gal do it.
Yeah.
Having a gal. Oh my gosh, that is extremely
I feel like I'm going to get canceled.
Yeah, that's extremely silent boomer to say that.
I'm suggesting it. I didn't say that. Do you print out the emails when there's a note in the footer that says be sensitive to the environment and don't print this out? Or do you print
Especially then. That is in fact the only use case in which I print it
in
out.
color.
Oh, yes. Well, I've got a color laser printer right back there.
So the beat goes on with the generational reporting because we heard the same thing about Gen Z and millennials about how commerce, because they're so positive and so great and so diverse, is the other one that gets thrown into every single generation, which is pretty much common sense that if the generation creating this generation is the most diverse, then this one will be more diverse. Like, come on, you almost don't have to write the sentence.
I think that's right. We just stick to kind of the same generational bullet points over and over and over again. I was thinking also about the kind of executive summary page of the Morning Consult survey, which is called A Brand's Guide to Gen Alpha, What the Youngest Generation's Influence Now and As They Grow Up Means for Brands. This is from March of last year. And first of all, it is not a survey of Gen Alpha. They're too young to take surveys. It's a survey of their parents.
Right.
And they surveyed 2,000 parents of Gen Alpha kids and 1,000 parents with just kids under 18. So so they had something to compare against. But they have interesting things in here. One of the things that is interesting is that the parents in this study believe that their kids will be better off than they were. So this kind of optimism about the parents believe alphas will be better off than they were. Now, what they mean, I think, is financially, because the sub point on that is, but not in terms of mental health. And this is because of COVID. Obviously the lives of alphas are deeply digital. Half of them on a tablet. They're already influencing purchasing, especially true for food and beverages. And it's like, well, yes, parents feed their children, I hope.
So that trend will continue, do you think?
Yes.
Okay.
They will continue to feed their children to the best of their ability.
Your second hot take in this episode.
Yes. And children will continue to say, but I want that kind of cookie.
You say, we have those cookies at home.
Yes. That is the correct parental response. But the next one is also interesting because they say this is where things start to get, actually all of these start to get like a little bit weird with each other. Like there's a tension inside all of these bullet points. So alphas are already influencing purchasing. That's especially true for food and beverages. 2 bullets later, parents emphasize healthy eating, but McDonald's.
Right.
So it's a balance of veggies and Happy Meals. And it's like, uh-huh. They have young children.
Kids like chicken nuggets. Like
kids have liked chicken nuggets and like fish fingers and fries and micro burgers with nothing on them forever. Yeah. Wait till they hear about the kids who show up in a quick serve restaurant and just want a plate of plain pasta with butter on it because that's all they will eat today. which is also a thing that goes back.
My daughter is a Gen Alpha and still does that.
Yes. I know
I have
some.
no problem with it. It's fine.
Yes. The other thing, though, that's interesting is Gen Alpha parents are financially preoccupied. The Great Recession is impacting millennials' parenting style. Now, we didn't really have a Great Recession. We had a COVID recession, and we very quickly recovered from that. So, but the last bullet on the page is travel happy parents are bringing alphas along, and alphas are already influencing where their families go. I just want to say, like, if you're traveling with a child who's under the age of 10, yes, your travel choices are influenced by the children. You have to take them to a place that they're not going to drive you to want to kill them.
Right.
You're going to go to theme parks and you're going to go to places that have a kiddie pool and you're going to go to places that have a daycare on site. Like, they're going to be those kinds of choices. But what's interesting is, we're financially preoccupied and really like impacted by the Great Recession, but also we're going on lots of family vacations.
Yeah. So the way they present the data, it's like we surveyed parents of young kids and they are going to Legoland in droves. That is the future of everything. And it's like, no, it is a life stage where you are looking for experiences to have with your children. And again, you copy paste it from generation to generation. But in the past, you've said this a lot, that you said it even on this one, that it's really not about the generation that's being described. It's about boomers almost always. I mean, that's what millennials were. But as you're talking, I'm getting more freaked out because Gen X was about boomers. Millennials were about boomers. Gen Z was about boomers. And now this is the fourth generation, right? That is still framed against boomers and this, what was decided was the normal American life, which has not been normal for 35 years.
So I actually think it's even worse than that. I think that boomers themselves are this aberrant generation. They're like the first generation that just rejected a whole lot of things about how things were before. Until
it served them. Then they were like, oh, actually, this is good. We'll take advantage of this. But yes, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
But I don't know if it was until it served them so much as like until it became a necessity. Like, you get married and have a kid, you should move into a house and,
I argue that serves them.
Sure. But like so it's just like, it is what it is. I think that's right, though. I think we are continuing to talk about boomers. And I also think like, it's very funny, the kind of assumption that Gen Alpha is raised by mostly younger millennials, when, according to this data, 1 in 5 of Gen Alpha parents are Gen Xers. And, so like there is still the story of like either delayed parenthood or kind of extended parenthood, that like, people have more than one kid, and when they do, those kids cross generational lines. It just it's a thing that happens. My brother is a millennial and I am not. Right. But I think the other thing that is, obviously you do have the like diversity part of things, but where things started to get like, I frankly, I don't think I got past slide 6 because I just freaked out on slide 6.
Which is what's the data point that froze you? Oh my God. Hands on head, you're in trouble.
I was like, why? This is why, I don't know. This is why many things. But like, if I were on the research team and I saw this data point, I would have been like, yeah, Gen Alpha. We need to focus on this. Like, what is going on here? Yeah. So on the 6th slide of this Morning Consult report, they talk about the values about raising children that parents of Gen Alpha possess. So it's how important are each of the following factors when thinking about raising your children? And, there's like it's a power, or it's a utility index score. So a score of 100 indicates that the factor has an average likelihood of being considered the most important to a given respondent. A score of 200 means it's twice as likely as average. 50, it's half as likely as average. So, extremely important, 3 times as likely to be most important. They are physically safe. Then it's grow up in a stable family. Then it's a big drop to are honest, have integrity. And then a little bit of a drop, but still at the 200 score level of have a sense of self-worth. And there's a call out on this one. And this is the one where I just went, hold up. Why are we talking about these babies? Like, I need to understand their dads. Because it says here, the largest gender gap was on prioritizing children's sense of self-worth. Men's average utility score was about 50 points lower than women's, which indicates they consider it much less important. And I just can't get over wanting to know why that is. Like, what is going on with the dads that having a sense of self-worth?
You're looking at this table and you're focused on the asterisk.
Yes, that's me though. But like 50 points lower utility score than women, like still probably, it's still obviously over the 100 line. It's like,
right, but it
has an average likelihood of being considered the most important, but the men are 50 points less than that. Like if that's the case, then this number should be much, if we just did it among the mothers, this number would be much higher.
Right,
so
it would be around 300.
Yeah. So what?
Yeah, that's the follow-on study that we would recommend, I think.
The things that are
and it goes into something we talked about a couple episodes ago about.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and
it goes into a couple episodes ago when we talked about the difference between gender attitudes that's been emerging over time.
Yes. And we did this little survey last summer, I think, where we asked 18 to 21-year-olds, 18 to 24-year-olds about their kind of relative pessimism and optimism about their current situation a year out, 5 years out by the time they turn 30. And we are still kind of going through that data to see what it says. But I will just tell you that with my very limited quantitative analysis skills, I can tell you that the men in that sample are much less expansive about the types of things that will be going well for them 5 and 10 years out.
Mm-hmm.
Like they are very focused on very traditional achievement markers. It's like get a job, get a partner, have kids, and do that by the time I'm 30. And I really wonder about like what the effect of not hitting those milestones by the time I'm 30 are going to be on those guys, because the women were much more ambivalent about being married in the next 5 years. Married by the time I'm 30, sure. Married in the next 5 years, I'm 19. No.
Right.
Having kids by the time I'm 30, yeah. Having kids in the next 5 years, I don't know. That seems
right. That's like 2 steps away.
That's 2 steps away. But the flip side of it was like asking men about a variety of kind of lifestyle factors. So like, would they be involved in their community? Would they have close friendships and spend time with their friends? And they said no to those things. And women said yes. And it was like, those were like big significant differences of like, the women were like, I'm going to be, by the time I'm 30, I'm going to be active in my community. I will have had friends all the way across. They're consistent about the friendship score. The men are like, I have good friends now. 5 years from now, I'm not going to have time for friends. By the time I'm 30, no time for friends. It's going to be me, my wife, and my kids. And my job. And that's it. And I just feel like knowing that little glimpse of things from a not terribly scientific study that we did, just to kind of out of curiosity about optimism and pessimism amongst 18 to 21-year-olds, because we had people in focus groups 2 summers ago telling us in that age group that they had concluded from the COVID pandemic that they were living in a world where no one cared whether they lived or died. And literally someone said that in a group. And other people said things that were similar to that. And that line has stuck with me because I think that cute little note on the executive summary page about they'll be better off financially, but their mental health is destroyed, like is possibly quite real and something that we should look at. But if the fathers of Gen Alpha don't think that having a sense of self-worth is all that important, then like, maybe we have a guy problem. And I don't mean like it's the guys that are the problem. I think we have a problem with how we treat men in this society. And I think Scott Galloway's prescription, which is just go get married, guys, is like not a fulsome response to the problem. Like men need friends. Men need to be embedded in their communities. Men need to have a sense of self-worth that is independent of their freaking paycheck. Like, I just feel like every Black woman I know is out here resting and taking care of her skin and trying to fight the patriarchy and doing the work. And these dads are like, pfft.
They're just staring at their bank account, just like, shit.
Yeah. I mean, like, what's also interesting, though, are the things that are not high value to these Gen Alpha parents. And so, like, really not important, have more varied experiences than I did. Develop strong friendships.
Yeah, it's a problem. And it also contradicts the entire thing of Generation Alpha will be this really, like every generation gets the copy paste of how optimistic they are, how powerful they see as the future and the tools that they're going to have access to and the change they want to make. Those responses from their parents are going to be soul crushing.
Yeah, and they're extremely weird also if we assume that, as we can from this survey data, that 70% of them are millennials. Right. Millennials were supposed to be the ones who had good family relationships. They were the ones who trusted trusted in institutions, who, were going to be globally facing and digital natives and the things that are showing up here as not that important to parents of Gen Alpha are things like have strong family ties, develop strong friendships, prioritize taking care of others, being free to take risks and choose who they want to be, make the world a better place. It is a story about gender. It is a story about all that hope and optimism that we ascribe to millennials just leaching right out of them. And what they are left with is, I want my kids to be physically safe and healthy. I want them to have stability. I want them to be honest and have integrity. And I want them to be kind and respectful. And it would be nice if they were financially successful.
Yeah, it's like a return to colonial values. It's like, I just want them to live until they're 40 so they could procreate.
Yeah.
then all bets are off. Yeah. Anything on top of that is gravy. If they like themselves, okay.
Yes. And it's got just a sousant, as John Stewart would say, of individualism, the honest, have integrity and can think critically independently. We got to have that. We got to have that little American value in there of individualism, which I'm not against. I'm glad to see those things in there. I think it's interesting, though, that making the world a better place, making their own choices, being free to take risks and choose who they want to be, being inclusive to others, those things are way down on the other side of the.
It is frightening to see the position on the.
Yeah.
On the graph there.
Yeah. So I didn't get past slide 6. What else is in this report, Adam?
It's amazing. The rest of the report basically tells us that they're digital natives.
Oh, well, cool.
There's not really a critical analysis after that of that data.
So my question is, if they're all going to be riding in their self-driving cars with their Apple, what's the thing called? The
Vision Pro.
Vision Pro, thank you. With the Vision Pros on their faces, are they going to be able to print out what they're seeing from me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Because otherwise,
they're going to print the metaverse for you.
Print them. I think we found the name of my next album.
Yeah.
Print the metaverse.
Oh, I love it. It's funny now that you say that. So I'm looking at the McCrindle Group's infographic of Gen Alpha. I'm trying to understand the time scale they use because they're showing baby boomers at the same size as Generation Alpha, but that can't be right because we know the numbers are different. Anyways, never mind math, but they have this list down at the bottom that runs along the timeline that says incoming technology. And so it starts in 2010, which is out of sync with the timeline directly above it, which is frustrating. But it starts with the iPad in 2010. Yes. So you reference that. They talk about that in the book. Then Instagram, Siri, the GoPro, 3D printers, does have Google Glass, as you mentioned. It skips, so 5G in 2020, which is a extremely fucking weird technology to call out because it has no discernible benefit to consumers. We didn't choose it or know what it does or interact with it in any single way. So it goes Fortnite, smart speakers, AirPods, 5G, then biometrics, quantum computing, chat GPT in 2023, and then autonomous vehicles. But it totally leaves the metaverse out. It just skips over that.
Yeah.
And I'm confused.
Well, I think at any given moment in time, we're all trying to figure out, like, in the 2009 book, he references, Google Glasses because
he has it in there.
Maybe
in
that would be a thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but that no one used those. There were a handful of tech journalists. That's it.
Right. So why even include it now? In hindsight, you could know that it didn't have any impact. It maybe was what was that stupid thing called? The Apple Newton. It was like a 10-year presage of handheld computing, but that product is not worth talking about. So maybe the Oculus or the Vision Pro turned into something, but Google Glass is not worth, it's a footnote.
Yeah, and I think like the interesting thing about that is like it does feel like making fetch happen. The 3D augmented or virtual reality goggle thing has, I still sort of tell this story from time to time of being at a friend's. I was friends with a group of guys who all had birthdays around the same period of time, and there was like a group birthday party at our friend Jules's house in the Valley. And in LA, and I have a photo of Jules sitting on the concrete, like the covered patio part of the outside, with VR goggles on, looking at because he was a video game developer, so he was looking at one of his 3D games or somebody's 3D game through the goggles. This is like 2000,
right? Yeah, this has come around before.
Yes.
This is not the first time this has happened.
Yes.
And just in the connectivity that we have now.
Exactly. And even like, they are really trying with Vision Pro. But I think, even like Oculus, which has done reasonably well, is not like being used constantly. Like there are very specific use cases. It's apparently easier for young people and boys to use it than women. I will never be able to use it. I get motion sickness just with like certain video games. Like some games don't bother me. Some games really do. I could not tell you what the difference between them is. But like we just started playing Alan Wake 2 and I'm like, is this the same people as Control? Because I'm getting motion sickness again. And it is. It's the same people as Control.
Oh, that's funny.
In fact, it's like the same, like it's a crossover universe. Anyway, games. But yeah, like it's just, I work in, this to me smacks of, McCrindle Group is a market research company. They look at tech trends and they want to note the tech trends they have noted previously, and they're not all that meaningful. I also just think I think we kind of miss what these tech trends actually represent a lot of the time.
Especially in an infographic format.
Sure.
It's a dot on a map.
It's a dot on a map. Oh, I do love me a scatter plot.
Yeah.
God. I saw one the other day that was just like it was a 2x2, and then it had points mapped on the 2x2 that were just like two intersecting data points about demographics. It was like an ethnicity and a age group, or a gender and an age group, and I was like,
you can't put these on the same plot.
What am I doing with this? And they weren't all the same. Like they weren't like gender and age group, gender and age group, gender and age group. They were like, some of them were gender and age group. Some of them were ethnicity and age group. Some of them were like mindset and age group.
Some of them were height.
Yeah. It was ridiculous.
I think the world needs more editors. The world needs more editors.
Amen.
I mean, come on.
It's true.
We could use one. We could probably use one or two.
Yeah. So I think like part of the reason I'm skeptical about like including virtual reality, augmented reality right now in any of these kinds of analyses is they're not being widely used. And so they're not having any other effect on people because they're not in wide use. So what is in wide use? Well, we still have things that we're continuing for reasons passing understanding to call social media, when what they really are just user-generated content.
Yeah.
Interspersed with branded content. These are entertainment platforms serving up cheaply produced, more or less, content driven by algorithms. And, I was looking at a survey, a New York Times Siena poll this morning, because I like to do that. And, there's a question in there about media consumption. What is your single most trusted source of news? And social media is now higher than cable or broadcast news network, not broadcast news networks, but like broadcast news shows. So like the evening news on NBC or CBS. And then the next highest one in this sample was Fox. But number one is social media.
Those surveys are more flawed because the question is phrased as which do you trust? Mm-hmm. But what they are actually reporting is which one do I use the most? A person can't trust the broadcast news because they have never watched it or haven't watched it except when it's on incidentally. They get their news from whatever social media source, and then they attribute, was it phrased as social media in general or was it by channel? By platform? It
was social media in general. They did then subsequently ask about which platforms they used, but and there's the use of TikTok is growing in these kinds of surveys. But
was Gab Social number one, I hope?
No, I don't know if that was in the battery. I think that might have just been an other. Gab and Truth and whatever that other one is. Parlay, was that what that one was called? The Parlor? Oh,
yeah, that one folded, I think.
Did it? Oh, okay, good. Because come on, we can't have all these. I'm like, everyone's all like, find me on Blue Sky and Mastodon and Threads, and I'm like, I'm not going to find you any of those places.
Right. What if I just don't?
How about you tell me how to subscribe to your Substack? We'll just cut to the chase.
Right. Send me the good stuff. I don't want all the other detritus.
Yeah. I don't need all this. Yeah, I mean, I think what is more interesting is growing up in a period where we have basically torn apart and then reinvented the cable environment, right? So you're not going to, but in 10 years, we're not going to be buying a cable package. You're just going to be buying internet. It's going to be more expensive than it is now. And then you're going to get a rundle, whatever, of your favorite content streaming apps.
I hate the word rundle. I know it comes from Galloway.
Yeah.
You got it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I've such a love-hate relationship with that guy. I
like Scott Galloway, but that word rundle just makes me fucking crazy. I don't know why I hate it so much. I think he's fine, but I don't like that word.
I think he needs 25% more therapy. But then don't we all? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of these things still feel extremely manufactured, arbitrary, like, I don't know, this thing was invented at this point in time, so it must be important. And it's like, I don't know, like, would we have said that like a major influence on Gen Xers is the fax machine? And I'm sure we could find a file piece from CBS News in 1987 that said yes. But like, did it? No. What exactly did that do? But there are things in technology and culture that absolutely do affect the way people perceive each other, the way people perceive the world around them, and the systems that they live in, and work, and politics, and lifestyle, and all of that stuff. And I just would not be putting virtual reality, augmented reality, faceware on that list at the moment. Even like the quantified self stuff feels like it's not nearly as impactful as the selfie. Like thinking about young people's interaction with their own, the way that they look and the way that they feel in their bodies, it has way more to do with looking at yourself in the camera all the time. Like you are seeing your own face on a screen constantly.
Yes.
And like the more you do that, the more you kind of surface area for self-criticism that you find, and it can really warp people's views of themselves. But like, I don't need to be wearing 12,000, IoT wearables to find out that I don't like the way I look. Right. Like
I've got it right
Instagram
here.
will do that for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The phone as the centerpiece of all things, and the way it has kind of continued to metastasize in its cultural influence, that I think is the more interesting thing. But it's really hard to like plot on a scatter chart. Like the iPhone was introduced in 2007. The App Store came out like the next year. What do we say after that? Like, it's why like tech reporters get obsessed about like, is the camera that much better that I want to get a new iPhone? And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like
That's
it
not
is
the
still
point.
having this expansive growing effect
Yeah.
on society that has nothing to do with the feeds and speeds or how many camera lenses are on the back of the thing.
19.
19? Oh, cool. It's
Yeah.
just, wait, didn't I just read though the other day something about like, it turns out that some species of spider, like a daddy longlegs or something, has more eyes than we previously knew. It had been hiding its eyes from us this whole time.
I don't know. How do you have this much time to read?
I don't know.
What goes on?
I feel like I never read, and yet information just, this is how I used to encounter popular music. Was
Now it's
like,
just all served to you
it
algorithm.
just like absorbed it.
Yeah.
And now I just get weird animal news.
And arachnid news. Let's be.
True. Yes, let's be precise.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad we got to know Gen Alpha.
Yes, I think there's
here
more
they-
to. I think
here
there's
they
more to
come.
do here. I mean, they're upon us.
Yeah. I
you
mean,
have
not all of them, because they have another year to be born.
It's true. It's true.
So-
We should check back in 2025 when they're all here.
Then we'll know conclusively what they're like as a generation.
Oh, absolutely. We'll just
Yeah,
go
January
interview
1st.
some breastfeeding women and find out what their babies think about
Yes.
all sorts of things.
I think what we should do is record an episode on January 1st so we could publish the conclusions of this conversation and really nail it down and be like, so Generation Alpha, they're going to shit in diapers. They're going to spit up sometimes.
You know what?
Some of them like carrots. Some of them like bananas.
Mhm.
Some of them don't.
But we're really going to have to think about like how committed to their sustainability mission they are, given all that diaper usage.
And what does it mean to luxury brands? I think is really the key. So,
Yeah.
how will I manage them?
Though I am now reminded of going. If my friend Becky listens to this show, I want to just little apology right here for this story. But I went
You
to
don't have to say
Thanksgiving.
her name.
No, she knows this story because we talk about it all the time. But I went to Thanksgiving at her house one year in New Jersey, and a cousin of hers had a 2-year-old, 18-month-old, something like that, very small child. And they come dressed to the nines to Thanksgiving dinner at Becky's parents' house. And the baby is in like Louis Vuitton. And I truly had never seen anything like it before. This is not a feature of Oregon in the 1980s. So I was like, what is that? This is the best dressed person I've ever seen. And it's like a Louis Vuitton skirt and a Chanel sweater or something. And I'm like,
was it like a novelty? Did they do it because they knew it would be sort of funny-ish? Or was it like, this is how they dressed their baby?
Because mom was dressed similarly.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. I mean, they all looked great.
Someone got me, when Emily was born, my friend Jamie got Air Jordans
Mm-hmm.
for her. So they were little tiny baby Air Jordans. It was
Baby
adorable.
Jordans are pretty cute.
It's adorable, but what? And I was like, oh man, this is too nice. Don't. I felt so bad. It was so cute. It was such a nice, generous gift. And I was like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable because
So funny.
It doesn't make any sense. I'm too practical for this.
I did an ethnographic interview once in a sneakerhead's house in Toronto. And we walked in. The first thing you see at the front door is the lineup of matching Jordans in every size, because this guy and his wife and all of their kids had the matching Jordans. And apparently they'd had like some reason to all be wearing the same shoes that day. And they're just like lined up in size order. It was adorable. And then he showed us like the closet of collectibles that he drives over to Detroit to get when like shoes drop.
You said like, I don't need to do an interview. I saw this at the front door. I get it.
Yes,
I get
exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think we may need to return to Gen Alpha land. Maybe not as soon as January 1st with a conclusive update, but digging in more to this and trying to find parallels.
And I think there is more to understand about what's in some of these early research decks. I need to get my brain unstuck from slide 6 and look at some of the other ones.
Slide 8. You're going to love
it. and we can always come back to this, because I think the other thing I'm trying to get a sense of is how much are Gen Alpha like showing up in the public narrative, because we're still talking about Gen Z. Like, I think some marketers are moving on to thinking about Gen Alpha, but the press is still talking about millennials and Gen Z and boomers and everybody else. And still continuing to try to call in Gen X, and Gen X is like, I'm outside having a smoke, so no.
Not interested. Leave a message. I'll call you back.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
All right, Adam. It was good to see you.
Yeah, you too. In the Demo is written and hosted by Farrah Bostic and Adam Pierno, with support from the Difference Engine. Edited by Allison Preisinger and Amp Studio, with production support from Ashley Darrington. Music used with permission by Omega Man under the Creative Commons license. Go to inthedemopodcast.com for behind-the-scenes research, supporting information, and transcripts. If you'd like to support the show, please rate, review, and share the show with people you think will appreciate it. Thanks for listening.